To come to you first then, Mrs Kane, if I may. I'm not sure the Minister actually answered the question at the end, whether or not he felt a review is necessary. Is this something you've spoken with him about since?
No, I haven't really discussed it with the Minister. He doesn't seem to want to talk to me. I think I'm very grateful, though I do have a meeting arranged with the Chief Executive to discuss the possibility of... I think there's two strands where I'm coming from. And I also think I take issue with the Minister saying that Ofsted's following what the Isle of Man's doing. I think Ofsted is very different. And in the calls for a review, it's principally, initially perhaps, a review of the Education Improvement Services, where the key area is for assessment. Is that being really effective in terms of improving standards for the education across the island of our schools? Is it helpful that the same people, the same team at the centre are both the support officers for schools and then the inspection regime, and some outside external validation in terms of how effective that is as an assessment, quality assessment, would be welcome. But also, I think my main call for a fundamental review of the department, probably not commissioned by the department, but one for Tynwald or perhaps for Treasury, but to look at what's the department for, how is it structured? I mean, particularly when we get to the new education bill, there hasn't really been any debate, no debate on the direction of travel of education, how it's determined. As far as I'm aware, no education professionals have had time to digest this, to have input into it, and I find that completely baffling. But this takes, I think, all the power off head teachers and gives it to the department at the centre. And we're talking, if they have complete power over all aspects of education without the checks and balances that were in there previously, the department even appoints governors and has them to a meeting annually to tell them the strategic direction of the department. I think this bill needs withdrawing. Let's have the debate or a fundamental review of education and its structure, and then we can get to the point of what do we want the education department to deliver for our children, or actually do we want the education head teachers to remain to have that autonomy over their schools, getting the best outcomes they can for their children without having the battle with the department at the centre. And we know that there is subtly under the surface apparent differences. One, I get a lot of teachers who are unable or feel unable to talk to me openly because that's frowned upon. That doesn't say that's a very open democratic process of discussion and debate about something that affects across the island. But the other thing is there's a Freedom of Information request, I think, recently published on the maths GCSE and the IGCSE and how that has impacted. And if reading the correspondence on that, and I haven't had a chance to read it all yet, that suggests to me that there is a separation, there is a feeling of them and us, and that the department, perhaps at the centre, is not the most supportive structure that could be to benefit the schools.
The Minister says he didn't know where you were getting your information from, and you're, of course, a former children's champion, but where else does this sort of area of interest come from?
It comes from me being a parent. I have a child in primary school and one in secondary school in state education on the island. The hangover from being children's champion, and the reason I resigned, was because of the narrowing of the remit of that role. And while it's welcome to have a clear focus on looked after children and vulnerable children, there is so many aspects of the wider provision of children's education and services that came to me that would then be out of remit, that I couldn't just shrug that off and ignore it. So the provision of speech therapy, the lack of access, speech and language therapy, the mental health provision on the island at the minute, particularly for young people, and most importantly now with this complete culture shift to a North Korea Orwellian type of regime with the education bill. And I think we need to have a discussion. Is this the direction of travel that we want for our education system?
To bring you in, Julie Edge, if I may, you've also made calls for sort of closer scrutiny of the department in the past. Is this a view you still hold?
Yes, very much so. And actually, I'm quite surprised, really, that a fundamental review hasn't taken place prior to doing all this extensive work on the education bill. Obviously, we all know the last review of the department was done in 2002. That was called for by the then minister. The letter that was issued to Tynwald members this week my belief that although we can be proud of having a good standard of education in the island, it could be better. My conviction that independent, impartial scrutiny of any organisation will provide it with valuable pointers for its future development. And I still believe that that is the case today. Obviously, I also had a question in this week with regards to the finances for the schools. And Ofsted recommended spend on salaries for schools is between 80 and 85%. We only have one school achieving that, and that's the Doon School, 76%. Manor Park's 84 and Castle Rushen's 81. Sorry, there's three. Laxey was 107%. There's something fundamentally wrong with the system. It could be funding that's incorrect. But I feel that to bring forward an education bill that the schools have not had any involvement in prior to it when it was being drafted, which would have been so beneficial to this bill, would have helped. I think an independent review. The minister that I'm talking about here was now the president, and there's been progress since the last time. I also put a question in last year about the Education Improvement Service received a letter back from the Director of Education. School improvement advisors cost the Isle of Man £341,000 per year. He said if we were to do Ofsted inspections to English, for an English school is currently £7,200. That would be the equivalent of £266,000. So actually that's cost effective in comparison to have a school improvements service. Now, I know they perhaps do some extra services on the island, but I don't understand what they're so fundamentally against having an external assessment. Chief Minister asked him a question with regards to how many external reviews have been done since 2014-18. 335. Education hasn't been done. Why not?
And before moving into politics, you worked in a school, of course. Does that change your stance on education, do you think?
Well, one of the reasons I went into politics was obviously my previous experience, both at school, worked in the MEA, at local authority, and I think I had concerns at the time. I was getting very frustrated with some of the elements, and you can only do so much when you're inside the system. And I saw it as an opportunity that rather than sit back, get frustrated, put yourself up there, put yourself forward, and then you can try and make the changes from inside. Obviously, a lot of the time you're asking questions of the Education Minister and you don't particularly get very clear answers. So it seems to be there's constant block. I do have real concerns that there's not a lot of progress being made on policy.
Laurie Hooper and Anne Call at MHK's join us on behalf of the department.
Thanks very much.
Mr. Hooper, there was an interesting response from yourself there as Mrs. Kane was giving her opening
I don't know
remarks.
what education bill Mrs. Kane's been reading, but it's definitely not the one that we've published a consultation document on. The department wanting to appoint governors. 4 of the governors in every school will be elected by parents, by staff, by students in the secondary school. We're proposing a pupil governor on every school. I've no idea where this departmental appointment comes from. It's a significant step away from the Education Council approach at the moment, where governors are appointed by the department to all the schools. So I'm not sure how you can equate having directly elected governors with department is appointing them. That's absolute poppycock, quite frankly. I have no idea where you get this idea of the department wanting to take more control of head teachers. That's absolute nonsense. There's nothing changing in the education bill whatsoever. The difference that is happening is the department is proposing to place in statute much clearer the way that it regulates and inspects the schools, which again is just really firstly about improving transparency and secondly about improving the process. And those comments about no engagement, we sat in a meeting, myself and Ms. Corlett sat in a meeting last week with one of the unions who came over to talk to us face to face about
Last week, but
the
the
education
bill has been drafted for well over a year. What about input when it was coming in?
Well, there was consultation.
There has been plenty of let me just keep talking about some of the other issues that have been raised here. I mean, there's been talk just there about our schools aren't spending the right amount of money on staff. If you look at that answer, what Ms. Edge failed to point out was that actually all of our schools, apart from the ones in that small bracket, actually spend over 90% of their salaries on staff budgets.
That was exactly my point.
Actually,
Ofsted recommend 80 to 85%.
But
So clearly there's
Ofsted is,
something
I'm sorry,
wrong.
Julie, but Ofsted runs a UK education system. They are results oriented. They are a very narrow curriculum. They do not at the moment encourage this broad educational growth, which is why they're doing their own internal review. And this is Ofsted doing their own internal review of their process. That's not an external review. That's Ofsted reviewing their own processes, because they have decided and they've come to the conclusion that the way the UK education system works, the way it monitors itself, is failing young people. That is not the situation we have on the Isle of Man, because we do not have a
How do you know
UK-style
that if you
education
don't get
system.
externally validated?
Let me comment on that as well. All of the SSRE process is externally validated. So the SSRE team, the SSRE is a self-review process. So the schools review themselves with support from the department. And then every 3 years, those reports are externally validated, which means there is someone independent that is brought in to assess not only the school's own self-evaluation,
This is the
but the
problem.
process as well.
You as a department keep talking about the schools. This is not talking about schools. This is about
Sorry,
talking
sorry,
about an
we've been talking-
Ofsted review of the department.
Sorry, we're talking
The
right
department.
now about Ofsted making recommendations in respect of the schools. Right, that's what we're talking about here. Ofsted, if you want to compare us to the UK, Ofsted is what's known as a non-ministerial department. They are accountable directly to Parliament, in exactly the same way that our Education Improvement Service, through our minister, is directly accountable to our Parliament. It's a comparable service. The only way you're going to get something that is equally as accountable is to create an independent review body. Because if Ofsted did a review of the department, that report would not be a Tynwald report. They would not be Ofsted are not accountable to Tynwald.
It would have to be brought to
If
Tynwald, wouldn't
Tynwald
it?
was commissioning it could
Of
be.
course it could.
But also on
Okay,
the, on
so
the
let me comment on that then. Why hasn't Tynwald, through one of the Social Affairs Policy Review Committees, commissioned an
Actually
external
recommended
report?
that.
Well, that's-
Julie, you
that's
sit on
possi-
that committee.
Yes,
In fact,
I
you're
do,
grilling
and
the minister on Friday. Why has that committee that you sit on, if you feel so strongly about this, why have you not commissioned your own external review?
I've spoken to the chair of that committee about that. So
So the
that
answer is you
something-
haven't done it
but-
because the committee doesn't feel it's necessary.
No, not at all, because it hasn't come up in so much that the minister hasn't actually stood in Tynwald and basically said he's not prepared to do a review at the
No, I
present
don't
time.
think that's
So-
actually correct.
No.
What it is nobody's fundamentally objecting to a review. What it has to be is, what is that review for?
Yeah.
Well,
It's going to cost money. The benefit has to outweigh the cost. It has to be clear what it is.
At the end of the
You're
day,
looking
we're
for in
all
this
elected
report.
by we're here to represent the people of the Isle of Man. There's a lot of concern with regards to the way that the departments perhaps operate, and I think just to
Okay,
make
let's-
it clear
let's
on the
comment on that then.
percentage of salaries, that is an indicator that perhaps the schools are not getting budgeted correctly, and without an external review, you would not necessarily know that. And that is the whole point of doing an external review of the actual department to ensure that the funds. If you look at the secondary school budget for the last 5 years, it's not changed. It was 25 million. It might have gone up to 26 million in a 5-year period. How can our head teachers be expected to continue to work like that?
Hold on, but you're commenting there on budgetary
So-
process. I don't recall during the budget debate anyone
And
saying
asking
let's
for
have some more
more,
money for
so-
education.
I'm not
No, no,
asking for
no,
more. I'm
no.
saying that's
Hold
why
on.
you need a review.
Hold
There's-
on, no, you
there's
are. You're
plenty-
saying
no,
exactly that the
not
money that's
saying
been
that.
allocated by Treasury isn't enough. So where was that in the budget?
I'm saying the
debate?
department gets a budget. They're not necessarily allocating the correct amount to secondary or primary education.
So where is it
therefore,
being
an external
allocated then?
an
But
external.
you're criticising the
so-
level that's been spent on teachers, and surely every parent and taxpayer wants
No,
as
you're
much
clearly
as
you're not
possible.
understanding the process of an
There
external
also
review.
needs to be resourcing for the schools in terms of materials, and I don't think that we are at the same point we were 5 years ago and 10 years ago. I think the Isle of Man had a fabulous education system. I still think we've got amazing schools with very dedicated people in them, and I think
Trying to do
the
their
minister and now with these diversionary tactics a little bit saying about co-location, nobody needs to know about that. This is about the education bill, the need to validate the department. The issues with
Hold on,
the
no, sorry,
self-certified
you-
review. Hang on, the issue
You're
with the
talking here about the
self-certified
education
review.
bill or an external review?
Both. Because how can you go for the bill with this massive power grab to
change.
the
Sorry,
centre
no.
without
No,
having
sorry,
a review of what
you've
the
made a lot
department's
of
there
a lot
for?
of really wild claims
Well,
about
can
that
I
bill.
can
but
I
could
just
you
substantiate
please
a few?
reference
Yeah,
reference
okay.
a few of those very
a few of them.
specific
A few of them.
claims.
So this
That would be
isn't
great.
Orwellian then. That a head teacher maybe dismiss a governor or head teacher who appears to the department to be unable or unwilling to perform functions under or in accordance with this act. So even if it just appears to the department and the teacher is unwilling,
clause 22?
they could be, clause 22, they could be dismissed. And the other part is, you were mentioning about the governors. Well, clause 21 2E states, the remainder of governors to be appointed by the department and that's 3 governors. So
no,
you could
no, that's
talking,
not 3 governors.
well,
That is a
That's
maximum.
what that reads. That's what I read in
No, that is it. That will be a maximum. So actually, in any school, there will be 7, a maximum of 7 governors, of whom 3
could be appointed
could be.
by the department.
So hang on.
Could
7,
be appointed by the
So
department, and then the
107
department
governors.
addresses
Up
them
to.
every year or annually or as often
107.
as they want to address them. So the department's giving them the strategic direction. It seems that there is a culture shift in the way education's going to be delivered
sorry,
if this
but
bill comes in.
I'm sorry, but I mean, your comments about the department being able to dismiss teachers, we actually had a very nice and constructive
Very good
conversation with
meeting,
one of the
yeah.
unions earlier this week, where we had a very good conversation about the way employment law works and how actually the department, whatever you write in the education bill, employment law still applies to all of our staff, which means the department would have to have an exceptionally good reason to be able to dismiss someone. There's no way
So why-
these provisions will be
so why is
overriding
it-
employment law.
so why-
You
well,
have to bear that in mind.
So
So
this is
why are
going
you
to be-
putting it in the bill then? Because the original the draft consultation to the head teachers 12 months ago did not have clause 22 as part of it. It suddenly appeared
Sorry,
here.
I thought earlier on you
So-
said that we hadn't engaged with teachers
There,
and
there was a
school
draft
leaders.
consultation last year. There hasn't been any consultation prior to this coming out, other than they had it a couple of days before.
But there was a
to the
consultation
actual-
a year ago.
A draft
Can you make your mind up?
consultation. A draft consultation. However, the failure of, the process that's in place, and you've just talked about it for employment law on the policy and the terms and conditions for teachers. Why are we bringing policy on terms and conditions and employment law into an education bill? It doesn't need to be there.
There isn't anything in there about terms and conditions or
Well,
employment.
Except
but
you can dismiss a
you can
teacher.
get rid of
That
a head
comes in
teacher.
twice.
sorry.
You
They
can
have to be
dismiss a
held
teacher.
accountable.
They have to be held accountable, but not. This is a new clause that's appeared since the previous version. So, and the other thing which really does concern me, this has been drafted in the UK, and I just feel that consideration of the Manx education system hasn't been taken. And I tend to agree with my colleague Daphne that I think perhaps it should be withdrawn and it should be consulted with the schools, with the head teachers
With
and the
public,
teachers
the
and the
parents,
I'm
and
sorry,
the
but
students.
the bill is out for consultation right now, and if you look at the consultation document itself, every single question has a space in it to provide as much comment and feedback as people want. And I would actually encourage people to utilise that.
On
and
particular
actually,
aspects, but not the overarching
there are-
move in
there
the
is
department.
there is a
becoming more-
section in the consultation which asks for general feedback
Yeah.
as well. The whole bill has been published, and I think it's fair to say that if anyone has any concerns, I mean, I've been engaging on social media with people about specific aspects of the bill. Please feed it into the consultation process, because we are really interested in hearing what people think about some of the changes that are in there. That I think actually all the changes that are in there, to be honest, everything that's being changed. If anyone has anything to say or any thoughts, please share them with
A
us.
fundamental change in there is taking the power and the autonomy away from the head teachers to design their own
I'm
curriculum.
sorry, but that's not true at all.
That is how this bill is reading.
No, that
That
is
the
absolutely
curriculum
not
is
true.
going to be directed.
And the autonomy,
Sorry,
the
but-
ability to the department to force teachers to take children who've been expelled from
I'm
another
sorry.
school.
Can I clarify-
Otherwise, they're
can I-
at threat of
can I-
dismissal
Can I
again.
clarify something on this? That is already the case. Only the department has the power to exclude students from schools. That is the way it currently stands. There is no change in the bill at all. Currently, only the Department of Education has the power to exclude
that
students,
has
which
But
is
the
why
head teachers are not at threat of dismissal if they then refuse to take
Take
the
a
request
student,
from
yeah.
the department.
there is nothing changing at all in that context. Absolutely not.